Hey guys, on this episode of the Born or Made podcast, I hang out with incredible guest Dana Cowin, founder of the Broadleaves and former editor-in-chief of Food and Wine magazine for 22 years. Dana's an amazing guest. I can't wait for you to listen in. Check this out. Welcome back to the Born or Made podcast. Born or Made is a podcast that I do where I'm super excited to meet with people that have inspired me over the years. And typically those people are leaders of industry, high performers, just extraordinary people that I get to pose a question that I think is super duper interesting. Whether or not they believe getting to the level that they've gotten to was something that they were born with, or if it was made over time, or potentially a combination of the two. And so the idea here is to really get into your story. And so I'm excited to introduce Dana Cowin, founder of
we call it the Broadleaves.
The Broadleaves, founder of the Broadleaves, and also just someone that was super impactful, whether you know it or not, in my career. But you were the editor-in-chief of Food and Wine magazine for almost 2 decades, right?
More than.
More than 2 decades.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just a little more to be fair, but 21, yeah.
So Food and Wine magazine is, in the restaurant world, and I think just in general in the world, a legendary publication, specifically for guys like me who have been in the restaurant industry my whole life. Getting into the pages of Food and Wine is sort of one of those bucket list, you've made it moments. And I was in Food and Wine once, and it was really exciting. And you are just a extraordinary person. We haven't spent an enormous amount of time talking over the years, but you just inspired me. And every time I saw you, I said, gosh, I got to get closer to her. She's just, you have this you have this essence, and you have this, this sort of inspiring energy about you. And you're like a badass female boss that just has really made waves across the industry that I am in, know, and love so well. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I just remember you guys came with like metal trays and fed us from the meatball shop when you first opened, and we were just covered with food, and the entire staff came in and they're like, who are these guys? This is unbelievable. It was so delicious. So yeah, your place was very well earned in the pages of Food and Wine magazine, earned through meatballs. And we had parties at the meatball shop. I mean, it was really a family affair.
You know, I'm probably one of the very few people on the planet that could say meatballs changed my life. But but it's true. Like, actually, meatballs have changed my life in a really funny way. So that's how I met you. Yeah. And the question that I pose here is pretty controversial. I think. Really diving into the conversation is what I'm excited about doing, because I know from just thinking about me personally and thinking about people that I've had this conversation with, there's so many different trains of thought here, right? When you think about, let's just use professional athletes, for instance, like was Michael Jordan, did he have to work really, really hard to get to where he was at, or was he naturally born with the ability to just be better?
But do you believe that you could do one without the other? Like, can you succeed with that talent?
I personally don't think so. Yeah. But I do think that there is some sort of, I guess the question is really nature or nurture, right? Like, that is really the root of the question. And I think that for whatever reason, I think everybody does have passion. And I would argue to say that the vast majority of people just don't know what that passion is or haven't found it yet. Mm-hmm. Because once you find that passion, I think it's like there's one gear, and it's just go, because it excites you. I mean, and that could be just for me, but I'd love to hear from you. I'd love you to try to tell your story from as early as you can remember.
Oh yeah, that would be early and long, but the beginning of I'm gonna end up running something, I mean, aside from being something of a bossy child, was I had all these dolls at home, and I didn't like dolls very much. And I lived in New York City, and I lived in a doorman building, and I really liked my doorman. And there was one doorman, Mike, who had a daughter, and we would talk about his daughter, Claudia. And so I began to bring my dolls to Mike and say, would you buy my doll for 5 cents? So I feel like it was a really good deal for both of us. I made 5 cents, and Mike got a doll worth far more than 5 cents for his daughter. And so I don't, it wasn't a big hustle. I think that it was partly, a gesture of camaraderie with Mike. And Mike, he was Russian, and Russian Easter, he would give me painted Easter eggs. So there's this lovely exchange going on, which I feel like is predictive for the way that I like to be in the world, which is these relationships don't go only in one direction, and that everybody benefits. So,
can I just stop you for a second?
Yeah.
So, how old were you then?
Like 8.
Can you recall in any way, shape, or form, what was the motivation of selling your dolls?
I didn't want them, and I should really. And I also I like the idea of having the nickels. I mean, I also had this beautiful carved leather box that had it was tooled with gold, and inside that box were stacks of pennies. And I just valued my pennies, and I've always counted my pennies, and. I feel like that's also a good predictor for success, right? Like, I did not think that pennies were useless, and I didn't think a doll that I had that had no use to me had no use to anybody else. What I wanted to do with my 5 cents, I can't really tell you, except that I liked to buy stones. There was a little store on Madison Avenue, and this is, it's 5 decades ago. So that sold like tiger's eye and amethyst and quartz and malachite, and you could get little stones for like 25 cents. Mm-hmm. So I would collect my little 25 cents, and I would go trade the dolls for the money and the money for the stones. And then I still have some of those stones. I have this beautiful cracked amethyst rock.
From those days?
From those days. That was more than 5 cents. And I think that probably had some allowance involved.
It's so interesting that you say that, and it's really even more interesting that you pointed out this tattoo on my arm. So this is my Grandma Chickie. Grandma Chickie was a stone healer.
No way.
Yeah. So Grandma Chickie had a stone and crystal shop in Queens, and for Christmas and any sort of holiday, birthday, whatever, Grandma Chickie would come with a little satchel of stones for myself, my sister, my cousins.
Okay, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Grandma Chickie.
As a healer.
As a healer. So I witnessed, funny story, really cool story, but I was probably around 8. And my grandmother and my step-grandfather, Bobby, had 2 dogs. One was called Berrigan, and the other one was Tequila. Tequila was like 16, and I loved Tequila. Tequila got very sick. My grandmother, my sister and I were at her house in Queens, and and Tequila got to the point where she wasn't really mobile. She was pretty stationary. And she had cancer. And Grandma Chickie put Tequila down and did a stone healing sort of ceremony with us. And the doctors said that Tequila was going to pretty much pass. And Tequila lived 2 more years. Now, I don't know if it was because of the stone healing, but I certainly do know that it was, I paid witness to it, and it was such, my grandmother had such an impact on my life because of those stones. Okay. Because of just like the open-mindedness that she offered my sister and my cousins and I. She was super spiritual, and so it's just a really interesting story drawn to that.
That is fascinating. Did people think that she was, other and odd, or was she very much in the?
She was not. She was the most outgoing, kind, warm soul on the planet. But yes, they did think that she was odd because she was a practicing Buddhist. She was, she would meditate 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. I mean, she was like way beyond her time, or way.
She was so ahead of her time.
Yeah. She was just like a really
different
special
astral
person.
plane.
Totally. All right, so back to you.
Sorry. Okay, so then in school, I liked school, but I also liked community and gathering people and getting people together towards a cause. And so when I was in high school, I ran both the newspaper and social service, so it was like doing good for the community and then reporting. And I feel like the seeds of everything I do weirdly go back to 12th grade. How is that even possible? I mean, you can only look back and realize that that's the case. And I went to college and it all disappeared. When I was in high school, it was a very small school, and I did really well, and I went to college. And I was like, oh my God, all these people have worked really hard to get here. And they're so motivated. I think I'm gonna sit this one out. And so, I wouldn't say exactly sat college out, but it wasn't the time of flourishing talent. I did do, in the gym zone, I went to school at Brown in Providence, Rhode Island. And at the time it was a jewelry mecca. And Mecca. It was not a Mecca for the workers, and that's
a jewelry Mecca.
Yeah, making handmade jewelry.
Cool.
And so I did an investigative journalistic piece about the treatment of workers in the jewelry industry in Providence, Rhode Island, which was really fun. And I did a ton of writing as well. And then when I got out, again, it's almost like there's waves of being really engaged and pushing hard, and then more fallow time to regroup and think, and then pushing really hard. Once I got out of school, I went and worked at Vogue magazine. I got the job the day that I graduated, and I did like 95 things at once. Like anytime I traveled, personally, I would also try to pitch stories. Any time that I was able to, I would go to a dance. I worked in the features department at Vogue, so I had the possibility of covering books, TV, movies, art, photography, design, all these things. And so every day I would go to a show, go to an opening, go to theater, and it was amazing. And I really wanted to write about it. And then I took writing classes on the side, and just everything all at once. All of the getting to know all of the writers who were writing interesting pieces at the time, people who were writing first novels, because I wanted to write a novel. And it was working for phenomenal people. My first boss was this older gentleman, although now I think it turns out he was probably 60, which doesn't seem so old, but he was white-haired, and he wore purple socks and a pale purple shirt, and he had a big, fat, knotted purple tie and pinstripe suits, and he went by Mr., so Mr. Lerman. But he would have people like Marlene Dietrich on the phone, and it just, is that timing right? But like these stars of stage and screen, you pick up the phone, and you didn't want to choke and hold your breath. It's like, Mr. Lerman, this phone's for you. But then I left because I felt I didn't want to be an editor, a line editor, which means like fixing crappy copy.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Can you just tell me, just so we're all,
yeah,
like anybody listening has an understanding, what is an editor, and also what is an editor-in-chief?
I imagine it might vary, but when you're editorial assistant, which is how I started, what you do is what you did back in the day was I laid out lunch, and I did expenses, and I answered the phone. And that's why all that other stuff was so exciting, because it brought a lot of color to my life. So that's the very first job. But you work your way up to become an editor. And when you're an editor, you would assign stories to writers. You would edit those stories. You may or may not work with the art department to put the art together for the pieces, and then they would go into the publication, whatever it was. So you had to understand what is the point of view of the publication, and what is it that the audience you're writing for really wants to hear about that they haven't ever heard about before. Like, that's your goal. You know, doing something that hasn't been done, telling people something that they don't know, or they might have heard a little bit about, but bringing them something new on the topic. Alexander Lieberman, who was the editorial director at Condé Nast, and he's legendary, would say you never want to be the first person to write the piece. You want it to be in the Times, or you want it to appear 2 other places. You want to be the 3rd place they read it, because that's when they'll actually pay attention, which really stuck with me.
Interesting.
You don't want to be that far out on the edge, at least not for those publications. Again, at that time, times changed.
So just so why do you think that in the event that it just falls flat?
No, but the people don't notice. You know, it's like, how many times did it take you to remember someone's name? So, okay, you're memorable. But most people, like if I meet someone, I don't remember their name the first time, I don't remember the name the second time, but the third time I'm like, oh, you, I've met you, yeah, how are you? You're ready to engage with the person, and that's like that with content. That was his point of view.
Cool.
So, an editor-in-chief oversees the vision of a brand and works with all elements that come together to support the brand. So that would be the art department for the visuals, the editors for the words, the marketing department and promotion to help with sales, although that's not their job, but you have to respond to marketing in case you want to be sure that whatever you're doing resonates with an audience. You work a little bit on PR, a little bit on events, a little bit on social, but anything that has to do with the vision of the brand, like why do we exist? What do we sound like? What do we look like? What do we feel like? Who are we for? Who cares? Why do they care? Why are we different from everybody else? What makes us stand out? What are we never? Like what do we not believe? That's all what an editor-in-chief does.
Wow. So it's essentially, you are in charge of obviously the voice of the brand, but essentially all external communication, probably most of internal communication, but your job really is to sync up all external communication from the publication.
I mean, you could say it that way. The difference between, let's say, an editor and a publisher, like Chris Kurvich, who I worked with for 19 years. So with me as the editor and her as she wasn't publisher that whole time, she's a publisher a chunk of that time. The publisher plays a big role as well, right? It's not, the publisher then makes you the money. I used to say, like, I got to spend all the money and she got to make all the money, but she also got to spend a lot of money. She corrected me once. She's like, I spend a lot of money too, just so you know. Like, you've been saying this a long time and I've never corrected you, but I do spend some money. That's fine, but I never made any money. So that part I know to be true. Editors don't generally make the money. It's not their job.
So you're like essentially you're like the mother of the business. You are like the nurturer of the business. You sort of set the tone.
The setting the tone is the vision. It's the who are we? Why is it important? Why would someone care?
Awesome. It's a big deal.
It's really fun.
It's a big deal, and I mean, again, like I feel like, and I think, I mean, there's probably not a soul in the United States, and probably most sort of cosmopolitan cities outside of the United States that are not incredibly familiar with Food and Wine.
It's a big brand. It's a good one.
It's a great one. All right, so you are leaving Vogue because you decided that you didn't want to be an editor.
I didn't want to be an editor. I went to, but a year later, I went to another magazine. I couldn't get away. House and Garden. I love houses, and I was hired for a job that was something that I really wanted to do, which was telling stories, not editing them. And I had to jump there from being the second lowest job, which is an associate editor, to the second highest job, which is being the managing editor, which usually, when I was offered that job, I was like, bleh, like people production money, I want to tell stories, I want to write, why am I going to do this people production money thing? And I kept giving other names of people for those jobs. But at the end of the day, the editor-in-chief, who's amazing and a great friend to this day, Nancy Novorad, was like, no, I think the job is yours and you should take the job. And I did. And we folded House and Garden 4 years later. And I went to another job at Condé Nast, and then went to Food and Wine as the executive editor, so the number 2 editor. It depends what publication it is, but number 2. And the editor-in-chief left 6 months later.
And so this is literally, you were given the opportunity to have pretty much one of the lead roles, if not the lead role, like less than halfway through your career.
Well, I guess it depends how long my career is. I'm not sure about the halfway point. But I was editor...
To date.
I was editor-in-chief of Food and Wine at 34.
Wow.
But it was also, at the time, Food and Wine was what they call the third book in a 2-book set. And that means that Gourmet and Bon Appetit were super well established, and no one really had heard of Food and Wine. And so it was a great opportunity.
Cool. And so, like, along the way, advice is something that I sort of tread lightly with, right? I feel like there's a lot of great advice out there, and there's a lot of things that have stuck with me. I think some of the best advice I've been given, my last boss at Frank Restaurant before I opened up the meatball shop gave me an enormous piece of advice. And my father, though our relationship was pretty rough, he gave me 3 things that have made me the man I am today.
Okay, that's amazing. What are they?
So the 3 things that my father gave me, that he gave me in a very rough way, but one of them is ladies always go first. And so I was probably 4 years old, maybe 3. And I remember we were walking into an elevator. I think it was actually the elevator in our building. I can't really recall the elevator. But I remember very clearly walking into the elevator, my father grabbing me, pulling me out of the elevator, grabbing me by my shoulders, looking me in the eyes with intent, and said, "You never walk in front of a woman. Ladies always go first." And from that moment on, I've never...
And why is that important?
Because it shaped, I'd like to consider myself like an old school sort of gentlemanly-like individual, and I think that is, I think it's important. I think, today, that could be potentially looked at as like a really old school way of thinking.
Could be some issues with that today.
Yeah, but
not back in the day.
Today, right? But I feel like I think it's a courteous thing to do. I think that holding a door for my wife, opening up a door for my wife, showing respect to my mother who created me. I wouldn't be here without her. I guess today that could potentially be looked at as controversial, right? Like women go first. But I have to, I feel like it's a tricky subject. It is. How do you feel about it?
It is. I grew up absolutely. In my house, you would never, a man would never precede a woman. But as time goes on, it feels incredibly sexist. Like, why is that? But I understand it's meant to be a sign of respect, and so as a sign of respect, we can just leave it there. Okay, other 2.
Handshake, firm handshake, and eye contact. very, very, very important. And the other one is, and I think this goes for any sibling, but for me, it's because I had a sister. My father said, you're going to protect your sister for the rest of your life, even though she was older than me. And so...
Did that happen? Has that happened?
Yeah. Yeah, my sister, even though our relationship could be difficult at times, she's my sister, and I protect her to the end of days, you know. And so with my son, every night before we go to bed, I give him those three things, and so he has those three things. And he also, we've added two. So one of them that we've added is remember everybody's name, because I think that's given me.
That's so hard.
It's very, very difficult. But for whatever reason, for many years, I think as a bartender for me, it was what made me successful.
That's amazing.
That when people would walk into the restaurant.
How'd you figure it out? How'd you figure out how to do that?
I don't know how I figured out how to do it, but you know.
Or what's the trick?
You know, like I just have this weird ability to remember people's names, and
I think there's volition involved, though. I do.
I mean, I know that for sure early on in my career, someone had told me that, you know, everybody's favorite word is their own name. And so I heard that, and I knew that when somebody would walk in the door at the restaurant, I'm the first person they'd see. I'd call out their name immediately, and they would sit with me. And I mean, most people never made it past the bar without sitting with me for a little while. And I made it a point, and if you sat at the bar, I would have a challenge within myself to say, if you let this person get up and sit at the table in the restaurant, you failed. You've done failed for the night.
Wow.
So my goal every night was to try to get people to sit with me at the bar, and I was pretty good at it.
I bet you were.
But so we've added that, and then he says, "I love you." So those are the 5 things.
Something that my grandfather had on a sign that was in his basement. Like his basement was a jumble of, you know, wonderful things that I love sort of poking around. It was quite dusty, not very orderly, but it was a sign that said "Plan Ahead," but the letters of "Plan Ahead" fell down the side because obviously the person who wrote the sign hadn't planned ahead. I mean, that was a joke. I think planning and being prepared is incredibly important in life. I feel that's how I approach every single day, trying to be really, really well prepared.
Are there things you do specifically?
You know, I'm not a great researcher, actually. There are people who are great researchers, but I'm pretty diligent about knowing what I'm getting myself into. You know, doing the research, being present, not getting into any situation that I don't understand. And so that's the plan ahead. And, you know, there's some people who turn up and wing it, which I've seen, and I don't admire. You know, I think that it's hard to do that very well. A few people can, but mostly you can tell that person hasn't shown care or appreciation of all the work that everybody else has done. So I feel like, you know, part of the goal in planning ahead is to be sure that everybody succeeds. Another thing from my grandparents, also weirdly in this basement, I don't know why the signs were in the basement, but don't confuse effort with accomplishment. It's one of my favorite things, because a lot of people will say to you, "But I tried." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't do it." So like, I'm not sure what trying has to do with it. I don't really care. You know, this isn't like the, you know, I tried club. It's like, let's get it done. And so don't confuse effort with accomplishment is everything from like, you know, my kids cleaning up their room. Like, you might have tried to put your stuff away, but from what I can see, there's stuff everywhere. Which isn't to say that I wouldn't be forgiving if someone, I mean, there's trying and then there's like, I did everything I possibly can and it didn't work out. That's like, I feel like that's actually a completely different matter. And, you know, I've been taught the importance of gratitude. And I think as a central tenet, gratitude's very crucial.
How do you practice gratitude?
In some really boring ways. Like, I wake up, and the first thing, so I do 3 things when I wake up. First, before I actually like wake up, I smile. I'm like, this is gonna be a great day, and I am just gonna smile.
In bed.
In bed, just like to myself. I mean, if you were watching me, you would see me smile, but I smile. And I go through in my day all the amazing things that I've planted in my day to have a great day. So, like this conversation today, I'm like, this is a really great part of my day. I look forward to it. So it's one of my 3 things. I'm like, that's gonna be a great piece of my day today. I'm so looking forward to that. So finding my 3 things in the day, and then answering the question, like, what am I grateful for? Which is different from the day, although it could be the same as the day, but I try to make them separate. Just makes the list longer. And so I find all 3 of them are great ways to reset your brain, particularly if you feel like, I'm tired, it's raining. Why did I say I would do that? Like there's so many things when you wake up, I'm hungry. I don't know, like I need to get my hair cut. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can get in the way of like waking up with a smile. But I like to do that.
I love waking up with a smile. That's so good. I've learned, and I've actually, I practice it. I read this book, High Performance Habits.
Okay.
And I believe it came from this book. And he talked about in the book that there was somebody that he had interviewed that gave him a tool that he'd used that said every time he walked through a doorway, he would put his shoulders back and he would smile.
Wow.
Any doorway that he walked through. So that was his trigger to remember to smile. And obviously, in the industry that I'm in, a smile just goes so long. I mean, a smile is just one of those things where, you can't really teach people to smile. It's something that they have to want to do, right? Like either people are smilers or not.
Yeah.
And I believe that a smile is a mental, physical, and potentially spiritual, if you're open to that kind of thing, experience when you do it. And so I love starting the day in bed with a smile. I'm gonna use that. I love it.
And that no one has to see it. It isn't for all those other people. It's like it's gonna be a good day.
Love that.
Yeah.
So, editor-in-chief, and I got to say, listening to your story, it sounds like you were an achiever. I mean, you have been an achiever, and I guess the question that I have is, can you point a finger on what motivated you to do it? Like, was it because you wanted to prove to yourself that you could? Was it because there was some adversity in your life that sort of propelled you to do something like that? What was it? Like, when you were climbing that ladder?
In climbing the ladder, I think that more than, there's ambition in there, but I really felt like I could do it. Like I saw that next thing and I'm like, I can do that. And I really want to do it. Like I was propelled more by joy. Like these are things that I really like to do and I want to have the opportunity to do them. I got into magazines because I loved words and I loved images and I wanted to work with them. It didn't feel like work. And so I don't want to say it was accidental, but the notion of being propelled by beauty and by things that bring you pleasure and the fact that the next step also included beauty and things that I really wanted to do and that I could do and that I was good at, which is why, stopping, like leaving Vogue, I wasn't good at it. I'm like, I'm actually not going to devote more time to something I'm not good at. Like, and don't flatter me and say that I am. Like, I wasn't. Like, I was a crappy line editor. Like, I'm not good if you give me 10 sentences to make them perfect. If you're a terrible writer. If you're an okay writer, I can do a good job. But if you're a crappy writer, forget it. I mean, the stuff that I did to these poor writers for the few times that I was line editing from scratch, it was just bad. Anyway, and then, I think that in the case of Food and Wine, having been there 21 years, success builds upon success, right? It propels itself, because the more you do, the more inspired you are and the more confident you are. And it is this upward spiral as opposed to a downward spiral, like this spiral of like knowing more, and just knowing more takes you up on that staircase, and knowing more takes you up on that staircase, and then you end up at the balcony and you're like, oh my God, I've just taken this whole spiral to the pinnacle of the staircase. And you look down and you're like, this is so great, seeing the land. But I feel like I also in my career have known like when to step out. So I'm curious with Born or Made. I think that a lot of I was propelled by just wanting to do the job that I was doing, but I was also not so propelled that I continued to do something that I didn't want to do, and so I quit. I quit Vogue. I quit Food and Wine. I quit something else somewhere in the middle, but I quit those two things that, to the outside, would be like, why would you do that? I mean, my parents, for one, like when I wanted to leave Vogue, they're like, how can you leave Vogue magazine? Vogue magazine's a great job. You're working for I was working for an extraordinary woman named Amy Gross. You're working for an incredible woman. Like, why are you leaving? I'm like, because I'm done. Like, it's not right. Mm-hmm. And I left Food and Wine because I was done. And I didn't have any idea what I would do. I mean, I had a job, actually, but I figured the job would be transitional. Like, I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to get out of there. And so I believe that you can also be driven and excited by opportunity and not be at 180 miles per hour consistently. So I'm like 180, and then I go to the gas station and I take a break, and like I get some chips, and wouldn't get soda, but like whatever. I get some fresh squeezed orange juice at a very special gas station. And then, and then I go back and I'm ready to get into gear, but only for what I believe.
How do you think your parents played into your success? If so.
Yeah. My father was incredibly supportive and thought I could do anything. That's a really great parent to have. My mother was always surprised when I was successful, but she was super proud when I was. She loved the fact that I was the editor of Food and Wine. Loved it. She also was very helpful to newsstand success, because anywhere she would go, she would buy like as many copies as they had. So, we could move hundreds of magazines with my mother alone, which was great. So I think they played a role in being supportive. And my father worked really, really hard. He had grown up in the Depression and started working when he was 13. And everyone in my family has an incredibly intense work ethic. Like, we all want to work.
Interesting. Do you think that played a role, that work ethic gene? Do you think that played a role in who you are today?
I think it plays a really big role, but I guess what is curious to me is you can have that gene, and then it can express itself, as genes have different expressions, it can express itself different ways. So there's the work which is like the Food and Wine work, which is very visible, but then there's the work that I've been doing, let's say, the last 2 years, that's building and thinking and doing like 9 million things at once, but not in the same visible way. And so I think that what's interesting is you can have a work ethic that's about getting things done and feeling involved in the world and life, that isn't necessarily about like running a business.
So after Food and Wine, you went on to do some cool consulting work.
Yeah, I had a job in between, but I worked in a restaurant group for a year, and then I left to do some consulting with Diggin, which I love. Adam, the founder, he's amazing, and the brand and the mission, the vision, the way that Diggin wants to change the world is incredible. And I, at the same time, I also started a podcast and also ramped up my work in sort of doing charitable things, and ramped up my work in mentoring, and traveled the country speaking and like doing a keynote for Bacardi all around the country that was empowering women, and talking about my journey to that point. And so there's tons of travel and just juggling all kinds of different ideas and things as my brain churned and churned and churned to come up with the new brand that I wanted to be a part of, which, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, is the Broadleaves. And Food and Wine, when I got there, there was an incredible test kitchen. They were brilliant. There's a really strong staff, and then there was some staff that needed to go, but there was great infrastructure, great support. And the really exciting thing about the Broadleaves is to start off from scratch. No infrastructure, and just see where that goes.
And so, and the vision of the Broadleaves is, it sounds like it's got a pretty wide casted net. You're trying to, or you're doing, you're not trying to, you're doing a number of different things that are making an impact.
Right, the desire with the Broadleaves is to help women get in touch with their intuition, and when they do, have them explore the confidence that that gives them, right? So one of the phrases that I hate is trust your gut, like enjoy the journey. Both of those things are really annoying if you're in the middle of it because you're confused. Your gut has indigestion, and your journey has like paths that have been cut off by rubble and rock. And so I feel like the key to answering that, the way you clear the rubble and you eliminate the indigestion and have the clarity to understand what you really want, is to get in touch with like who you really are and what you really believe. And once you've done that, you have the ability to do anything with confidence. So my goal in everything that I'm doing right now is to unlock the power of the individual through stories of people who've had the opportunity to unlock it and move forward and progress through challenges, and then to help people who still feel blocked and challenged find what's next for them. That's the coaching, and the speaking broadly is the women who are sharing their stories, and the giving broadly is the way of taking these lessons and sharing it with people who can't pay for it and don't know how to access it.
Wow. Just a quick question on, I guess I'm sort of curious. So when you say trying to help women find their intuition, I have sort of managed my life through a mix of different ways. One being my instincts. But I would also say that my instincts happen to be like that, your gut feeling. So how would you, you say that you hate that term. What would you...
I hate the term because it makes it sound so easy, right? Because it's like, follow your gut, like as if it's easy, and it's not. And follow your journey. You should, like, enjoy the journey. I just think that people have like rocks and rubble, and it makes it hard to enjoy the journey, but they should. And it's all about it. Like, it's all about the gut at the end of the day. I just believe that everyone has the answer inside of them. You have easy access to it, and it's allowed you to build this amazing business and fantastic life. Some people, their gut is just it needs more bacteria.
Wonky, just a wonky gut. They're not able to really understand what it is.
That's right. And so I only hate the phrase not because I don't believe in it, because I actually believe it's the essence of everything. I don't like the way it sounds like, it's right there.
What you got. Yeah.
It's just there.
Because I've learned through my journey in business and partnership, and people think really differently, right? There are logistical, operational, super functional thinkers, and then there are creative, sort of aspirational, imaginary, visionary thinkers. And I know for firsthand experience that there is a real difference. Like, there are those kind of people and those kind of people. Mm-hmm. There are people that will approach a problem, mm-hmm. and they will uncover every piece of data that they could find to figure out the solution for it.
Right.
And then there are people that will approach a problem and say, let's just do this.
Right.
This is what
That's what I feel. Let's just go do it.
This is what I'm feeling. Let's go get it. Where do you identify?
I'm a mix. I'm definitely not I'm never going to be the data person, but I'm sensible. And I go with the things that I'm very intuitive. So everything I do is based on intuition. Mm-hmm. It's based on. So I guess I fall into your second category of those people. I'm more like those people. I really am. But I think that those creatives have a path. Like, each one has a path and a purpose. And you just have to be sure you're on the right path, because boy, when you cross them and the expectations are mixed, that's a mess. Mm.
Are there any books that you've read that, I hate the questions, what's your favorite book, or what's your favorite movie, or, but I do love the question, what book do you recommend to people on a somewhat regular basis?
Something that I'm reading right now that has been recommended to me, it's The War of Art. And what I like about the War of Art, at first I read it and it's the same thing. I hate the cliches, it really bugs me. But this book got to me. Essentially on every single page, one way or another, says just do it. Stop talking about it. Stop stopping yourself from doing it. There's 9 million ways you're going to stop yourself. Just do it. Just do it, and do it every day. And don't make excuses. And I kind of love that as a reminder. I love the way it's structured. It's in these extremely, the attention span of a gnat, which I have a longer attention span than that, but just the way the book is structured, it's these short pages.
I love books like that.
And it's super, super digestible, and it has an arc. Even though I'm telling you it's just do it, it is. But it's a little more nuanced than that. And so I feel like for someone who's about to start a venture, at first I read it and it reads as though it's for someone who's a writer. And you're supposed to sit down and do your writing, but it's really whatever. For you, it's write your business plan. For somebody else, it's start training. It really is. Don't delay.
I think the question that I'm asked the most by people that work with me at the restaurants and on social media, my mother, my sister, my best friends, why or what is it, how do you do it? How do you? And I think that this is the essence of why I pose this question, Born or Made, because.
Do you know the answer?
I don't. And that's why I think it's such an interesting topic to discuss, because I've tried to think, when people say, hey, Mike, how do you get in such great shape? What do you do to get yourself to the gym every day,
What is the answer to that?
Do it.
Yeah.
That's
the War of Art, yeah.
That, it's like, it's basically, I don't think I am unique.
But what happens on the days you don't want to go to the gym?
I just do it.
Yeah.
And so I like you, throughout my career, and I mean, I've really only been in business as an operator owner for 10 years. So and I've created a few businesses, and I also go very, very hard, and then I know when to push pause and take a step back. And I think that has to do with me having sort of like humility in my life, and having my ego in check at times, not all the time. There's definitely been times where I've like, someone's been like, all right, man, you've got to check yourself. But like, I have been able to step back and let other people just take the reins. But like for fitness, I do go as hard as I go in business, right? But I train for 3 days, I take a day off. I train for 4 days, I take a day off. And like, if my body is telling me, Michael, you should not be doing this right now, I listen.
Yeah.
But if I know that my body doesn't need the rest, if I know that my body feels better when it's trained, although my mind is telling me, oh, Mike,
you have a good override system. I feel like some people have a good override and some people don't. Like, you want to align like what your body's telling you, and you can override your mind. You're like, right, and then merge them.
Although I will say that the mind is incredibly powerful.
It is.
Like, so powerful. Last year when I was running the marathon, I was probably mile 24 and a half, and you're just entering Central Park, and there's a big long turn, and coming down Fifth Avenue is like, nobody tells you this before you run the marathon, but it is a gradual uphill. It's like the last 5-6 miles of the New York City Marathon. And it's not a steep uphill, but it is all uphill for the most part. And then you get this big, sort of long turn into the park. And I felt cramping in my quads, and I started looking around, and my mind started trying to take a hold of my body. And I was looking around, and there were runners that were just sitting on the floor, just completely done. And I said, oh my gosh, this is the time. This is when everybody quits.
Yeah.
And my mind just,
it's
and
like,
then
no
very quickly, both of my quads completely seized up, and I couldn't take a step. And I said to myself, I've got my wife and my 2 sons waiting for me at the finish line. I had just raised an enormous amount of money for City Harvest, and they texted me right before the race of the amount of people that we fed through the money we've raised. And it was a monumental moment in my life. And I stopped, I like pounded out my legs, and then for whatever reason, and I've used this from that day, I started saying to myself a little mantra. I said, mind over matter, mind over matter, mind over matter. And for somehow, some way,
They released,
and I finished the race. And like, I mean, it could be coincidence, or it could be like I was able to tap into controlling my body with my mind.
I believe that.
And it was very real. So the mind is very, very powerful, but I think it works both ways. The body can totally, overcome what the mind is thinking, or the mind can really put you in a crazy place. I think in our sort of hyper dynamic, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, accessibility, the stress levels and the adrenaline and the cortisol levels in most human beings that are in our sort of world today are through the roof. And, stress is really intense. And, the mind plays really, really interesting tricks on us.
And it's really good reason to work it out.
Sure. So the piece of advice that you like to plan ahead, so that's something that's stuck with you.
I do. I like to plan ahead. I like this notion of, just do it. I like treat other people with kindness. I like give more than you get.
So I'm going to ask the question.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Right. It's like, okay, so now that you've had this whole conversation, what would you guess the answer would be? I would say born. even though because in my case, I feel like it all came very naturally to me. And so it's not born as though I have killer instincts like our friend Adam Eskin. Like when he hires, he's like, she's a killer. I like her. Like, he's like looking, he sees these qualities in people. I don't think that's what I'm saying I'm born with, but I was born with optimism, which I think is a great quality of success. And I was born with the desire to take the next step and to not be intimidated. So unlike that instinct that's just like, I'm gonna crush this, I have a different thing, but I was born with that thing, and I haven't had to battle like internal negativity or like, I can't do this, so it's more like I was born with this mindset that set me up for success. And it's not that I think you can't make it, but making it sounds more effortful than my experience. My experience has been more acknowledging what I was born with and bringing that to life in my everyday experience.
Wow. This is so great because there's been so many different
answers, yeah.
And by people that I, are all at a level of success, just not only in business, just as people, that I admire, and so just to being able to just see,
Well, I think that the thing is, it's so individual, and it's really life experience. It's how and where you grew up, what you had access to. I mean, because so many people, like, they take these huge detours, and then they have to really climb. I mean, it really is an athletic, intellectual pursuit to climb and succeed.
Yeah. It's so hard for me to not to say how I feel, because I don't, I think for me, I know I feel a certain way about this too.
I thought you said you didn't know.
Well, I feel, I don't know what propels me, right? Like, I can't put a finger on why I am able to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get right out of bed. Now I will smile right before I get out of bed, but get right out of bed and quietly leave the apartment and go to the gym before everybody wakes up, and I'm home right before my wife and kids sit down. Like, I can't tell you what it is. I know that I could tell you that I really enjoy how, being physically fit and healthy and well makes me feel. But I think anybody who would commit to it would also feel that same way. Very few people are able to stay consistent with it, right?
So
and
true.
With business, I can tell you that when I close my eyes and have a vision for a brand or a concept or an idea, there's no stopping me. Like, I'm not going to be a person, or I have not been a person that I've come up with a million ideas, but the ones that I actually appreciate in a real, viable way, I do it. I figure out how to do it. And so I can't tell you how or why that is, but I do know that I do believe that, similar to you, I think that there are certain things that have come naturally to me. And I think that everybody is born with a specific ability and talent. And I think that a lot of people are not paying close enough attention to be able to uncover what that is. Because I think once you do, it's scary if you find it later in life, right? But
No, I think it's scary. It's awesome. I think finding it later in life is even better potentially, because you're so free. The things that I hear people say, like, the fear drops away the older you get. So I think there's something actually quite nice about coming to something where you have that level of comfort and less competition with yourself and others, and you're just like, I got it, I'm gonna do it. I mean, you could argue that, well, they missed out earlier, but no, they got it. Like, imagine that feeling of satisfaction when they've been, like, craving and scraping at it, and, like, with their nails, and they're, like, cracked by it somewhere. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, I got it. I got this thing. I think it's great. But what you describe is very much the process of the guiding broadly, or the career psychic stuff that I do, because I just believe that everyone does have it inside of them, and they just don't. It's hard to get to.
When you say career psychic, are you clairvoyant? I mean,
no, I mean I actually love real psychics, and I think they exist. But it's more like I can tell. So that with the guiding broadly, if you give me an hour and a half, I can tell you what you should do. I can tell you what you're not allowing yourself to know that you should do. And I'm not saying you'll do it because there's so many blocks, but I can tell you like either a path to your dream, or what the dream is, or move it up a little bit. A lot of people, like if you, like somewhere in that time, they really reveal what is inside. Like someone, who wanted to have a cookie empire, but she was doing all this other stuff. And I was like, but you want to have a cookie empire. You've already won cookie competitions. Like, why are you doing all this other stuff? Well, I'm going to do that later. Like, why are you going to do that later? Do it now. Like, there's no time but the present.
So guiding broadly, is it only for women?
Well, the origin is women. And I haven't had a lot of men come to me. I mean, probably because it's just not, like, it's not the circle of trust. But I think I could do it for anyone. Hour and a half. And yeah, and then it depends. Like there's so many different. I find people at so many different places on their journey. Some people had this amazing experience recently, where I gave someone 3 things to do. One was she was doing a book proposal with someone else. I said you should do your own. 2 weeks later, there's the book proposal for the thing on her. Like it's incredible. Make 3 recommendations. She'd done all of them. She was ready for it. Some people are much less ready. It's just, getting to the heart of humans, which is really fun.
Getting to the heart of humans. I think we're going to end at that.
Great.
You are awesome. Thank you so much for spending the time.
Yeah.
A really fun conversation.
It's awesome. Great conversation.
I'm happy you said born.
Born.
Thanks, Dana.